logic, fact, reason. Mental illness doesn't discriminate, and we need to destigmatize that, and I think that the stigmatization of mental illness really plays into this a lot. That's part of the good I'm trying to do in the world, is just put a small dent in that. And with enough dents, that stigma will die by death by 1,000 cuts from 1,000 different sources. And maybe you can join me in helping destigmatize that. We can each put our own little cut in that stigma until it just blows up, disappears, goes away. Well, hello there. I hope that maybe we'll all learn something, grow, and continue to expand our knowledge of the world around us, which is really what this entire show is about. Whether we're talking about our new podcast, shameless plug, on the Dominique Does Life Network, First Question, 100% True Crime on First Question, or whether we're talking about the Dominique Does Life podcast right here, which focuses on psychology, true crime, and lifestyle. We're here to learn about the world around us. That's a beautiful thing. If you're listening in and you're new, that's what I'm about. While I went to school for psychology, I did end up going into more of like accountability coaching and lifestyle consultation. I felt this would be a more hands-on way to interact with clients who perhaps were in need of more. And so this is part of why these psychological topics are of such interest to me. This particular topic also plays into the broader topic that we've discussed when we've been talking about things like COVID, real versus fake news and information, data and technology, and how to differentiate between true and false. This plays into logical fallacies, fallacious reasoning versus clean thinking, and things that we don't realize are at play, like confirmation bias, to dictate what we think and believe. These are important topics, and this is why we're going to discuss this particular topic right now. Targeted individuals. What is a targeted individual? I don't know if there's a generally accepted definition. Fact check me. Share information. As far as I'm concerned and as far as I'm aware, and I am far from an expert on the subject, targeted individual is a moniker that an individual might bestow upon themselves because they feel that perhaps they are a victim of a plot or a Truman Show type of situation. They're being watched, and not just generally speaking by the NSA or by technologies that keep track of us. Fortunately, recently a lot of these technologies have been outlawed. I think more than surveillance, what we need to be concerned with is big data. But I digress. These targeted individuals, from what I understand, are not referring to any of that. They're not talking about just general programs of surveillance. They're not talking about facial recognition via the cameras that you're going to walk by on the street or drive under when you're going through a green light or stopped at a red light, for instance. But they're talking about more of a specific targeting. Please, again, if I'm getting any of this wrong, or if you feel that my explanation is not doing this justice, please let me know. You don't have to tell me your name or give me any of your information, but please share your experiences and share the information and perspectives that you have. It will definitely generate an interesting discussion, if nothing else, and it might broaden everybody's horizons, help us to all learn a little bit. Essentially, these people feel that they're being targeted. As far as I'm aware, a specific explanation as to why a specific individual is targeted tends to, in my understanding and experience, where things become a bit murky. There's never a clear-cut, well, gosh, I worked for the NSA, or I worked for the CIA, or the FBI, or I was a test pilot for a new space shuttle. It's never anything that clear-cut. It's always kind of just, well, I feel I'm being watched. I'm concerned about interactions I've had with people on the street, or just a general sense, I guess I would say, of just being watched, of being monitored, of being the focus of other individuals and other groups' attention. There's never really a super, in my experience, cogent reasoning. There's never I was a really important member of the government, or I was a really important politician. It's always just kind of, well, I feel I'm being watched. And that is actually something that is very typical of human psychology. Feeling now and again that we're being watched or looked at, right? That's something that's very typical of human psychology. It's a typical reaction. It's something that is built in and ingrained in our psychology to help us stay safe. When we talk about this a lot, but evolutionary mechanisms like fight or flight, for instance, recognizing when we feel that there's danger. Unfortunately, a lot of times, whether it be because of PTSD or trauma or just a mental illness, these reactions and these built-in sensors tend to go off when nothing is happening. And oftentimes, again, that could be from trauma, that could be from post-traumatic stress disorder. It could be from being a little bit high-strung, on edge, anxious, having another mental health issue, or a physical health issue. I'm not going to play into any potential psychoses or fallacious reasoning that could be involved in specific cases of people feeling they're being watched. But what I do want to do is I want to explain why this is common and why with some people it does tend to rise to the level of a disordered pattern of thought. And to that end, I think it's always important to be able to distinguish between thoughts, okay, ideas, comprehension of facts and data that we're taking in from the outside world and things that generate from our own experience and in our own mind. I just had a thought. It's like that light bulb going off above you in a cartoon. The cartoon light bulb in the bubble above your head. I had a thought about something. So being able to distinguish between thoughts and between feelings, which are not thoughts. I know a lot of people actually don't know this. Yeah, thoughts and feelings, two different things. Two different animals, folks. And reality. There's a shared reality, right, that we all have to agree upon. The sky is up, the ground is down. There's oxygen in the atmosphere around us. The earth is actually a sphere and is not flat. Then there's our own reality. I am feeling thing A or thing B. I believe that I experienced thing X or thing Y based on my memory, which of course is inherently faulty, but nonetheless is a very sharp function of the human brain. Personal reality and shared reality should line up, although there will be some minor differences. It may seem like I'm being professorial here, but this matters. When people feel that they're being targeted, to me, that seems to be a function of either being on high alert, maybe you've got some post-traumatic stress, maybe it does or does not rise to the level of a post-traumatic stress disorder because you have experienced some trauma in your life and the processing of that trauma is incomplete or was done in a way that perhaps incorrect or incomplete, right? Processing of trauma. The human brain is very good at that. It's very good at building a narrative. It's very good at processing trauma in negative ways. And it's very good at building that into our fight or flight and our survival reflexes, isn't it? You can see why the human brain evolved to do that, to help us sense danger and to get away from danger. But what happens when what we're sensing isn't danger, and in fact might just be some faulty censoring and some faulty wiring within our minds? I have to say, while this feels, and I believe is, important to explain and to get into, I also want to say that I in no way am going to discount somebody's personal lived experience. Saving space for the possibility that the person or people speaking to us and telling us these things, that they feel that they're targeted, they believe that to be true. Like, I'm not trying to call anybody a liar, and I'm not trying to say you're wrong. What I am trying to do is look at some possible explanations for things that might be at play in many situations involving folks who believe that they are targeted. So let's look into that. I'm going to tell you some specific stories in just a little bit, but let's look into this. I was watching a Vice documentary. In fact, there are two documentaries. One's a bit longer, one's a bit shorter. One is on targeted individuals, and the other is just broadly on the topic of what these individuals call gang-stalking, which they believe is a means or a mode of, I guess, shadowy powers of some sort. I'm really not familiar with what powers that these folks feel are at play, because it seems that the information coming from these people as far as what organizations are targeting you and why would they be doing it, it's always a very non-specific answer. And in some cases, it's almost a little too specific. Like, well, I walked down the street and I saw something that might have been illegal one time, and so from then on, I've been targeted. They want to silence me or something. You're going to notice either a little bit of an oddly specific, but perhaps inaccurate assessment in terms of an answer as to why, who, what, when, for what reason you might be being targeted, or you might just get a kind of who knows. They don't want me to know. And we've talked before about the term they and how it can really play into fallacious reasoning, can play into mental illness, and it's a really great buzzword for cluster B folks, narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths. Yes, I do distinguish between sociopathy and psychopathy and the like. People on the cluster B spectrum, and I'm not suggesting that targeted individuals are all on the cluster B spectrum, by the way, but let's say that somebody who believes they're being targeted encounters a cluster B person. The way that this cluster B is going to communicate to them is going to be so vague and so blank that this individual, who may be struggling mentally and emotionally anyway, is literally going to be able to fit everything they believe into what this toxic individual or group is telling them, because what they're saying is so vague and so buzzword filled. It's easy to use your confirmation bias and work from a conclusion that you've already drawn or that you want to be true or that you feel is true, and then to work backward to make what somebody or some group of people is perhaps telling you fit. And that's, again, a fallacious way of thinking. And that's something that's very dangerous to engage in for your own well-being and health. So it's really important to be logical and to question everything, and especially question things that you want to believe, because those things are likely not to be true. I know, it's a real bitch, isn't it? It sucks. I'm going to be honest with you, that sucks. We all want to believe in fairies, but maybe fairies aren't flying around. I love to believe that there are little fairies flying around. I used to believe in Tinkerbell when I was a little kid, but as I grew older, I realized that that was probably not fully accurate and in line with shared reality. Questioning things that we want to believe and questioning things, sort of narratives that are a little bit too comforting, is always really important. But I think that with some of these folks who believe that they are or have been targeted, they come across these really comforting or dramatic beliefs that fit right into this false narrative that they're telling themselves about who they are and why they are who they are and why they are the person that they believe that they are. Why am I this way? Why am I like this? Oh, look, here's a convenient narrative. Let me work backward from this conclusion to fold it all together. This is a dangerous way to think, and this is a dangerous means of perception. And so again, it's really important to question ourselves and to ask ourselves the tough questions continually, doggedly, question everything, especially beliefs that are comforting. That's something that I have found maybe lacking. Why do people believe this? I think that people believe stuff like this because it's better than thinking that you don't matter. Everybody matters, but it can be lonely out there, especially in today's world. Believing that you're being targeted and that you are being hunted and that everybody is concerned with and or focused on you, shit, that's a lot easier and more comforting to believe. Even if it's stressful and scary sometimes, it's a lot easier and more comforting than believing, gosh, I might just be a face in the crowd. Maybe I don't matter that much. Maybe I haven't achieved all the things that I want to achieve in my life. Maybe I feel a sense of powerlessness over my life. That's scary. So being able to sort of X that out with a particularly convenient mode of belief, well, that's attractive, especially if you're lonely. And especially if you're not asking yourself the tough intellectual questions that every human being should be asking on a daily basis. To know that you are just one among 7.5 plus billion people on this earth, well, that's scary, right? To think about how big the world and the universe is, and to feel small, despite the fact that we're not the small, meaningless people that sometimes our feelings are telling us we are. Well, that's convenient to believe. I'm not meaningless. I'm not small. I'm not needing to change my lifestyle up, find something more fulfilling to do, and find a purpose-driven way to live. No. I'm already being targeted, man. I can't do any of that. It's also a convenient excuse. I can't do that. I'm being targeted. Can't even leave my apartment. This is a too convenient, some might say, mode of belief. And it does go in line with conspiratorial and magical thinking, and unfortunately it does also line up with mental illness, which is where we're going. So this is from Wired.com. The article is by Laura Yan. It's entitled, Mind Games, the Tortured Lives of Targeted, quote-unquote, Individuals. Thousands of people, it reads, think that the government is using implanted chips and electronic beams, voice-to-skull, V2K or technology, to control their minds. They're desperate to prove that they aren't delusional. Well, stop right there. Working backward from an already drawn conclusion is fallacious. That doesn't mean you're doomed to lazy thinking forever. It doesn't mean you're not smart. If you're engaging in this, we all do it from time to time. That's why we need to stay vigilant. It's not just idiopathic. There's a reason for it. Again, oftentimes that reason is a combination of other mental health struggles, stress, confirmation bias, perhaps past trauma. And another influencing factor is a misunderstanding coupled with a lack of understanding of technology and how it works, and also government and how government does and does not work. It's a very pseudo-scientific means of inquiry. I would say it's irrational inquiry, more in line with pseudoscience than it is rational inquiry and science. And yes, the scientific method is involved with rational, non-fallacious reasoning. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, stay with me. Mind Games, the tortured lives of quote-unquote targeted individuals. Thousands of people think that the government is using implanted chips and electronic beams to control their minds. As I had mentioned, there's something that these people believe is called V2K, voice-to-skull technology. The article reads, they are desperate to prove they aren't delusional. Every morning, Liza wakes up and remembers that she's been tortured. When she looks down at her hands, pause for a dramatic drink of coffee. When she looks down at her hands, she can see slightly raised bumps where she believes she's been implanted with microchips. She is certain that the chips track her every move, that her family has been programmed not to listen to her. She knows that her mind had been pushed to the limits of human endurance. Quote unquote, the most pain you could put on a person before they die. In parentheses. The targeting, the rewiring of her brain is so extreme that she can no longer even cry. Okay, let's unpack this for a moment, shall we? This sounds like it may stem from trauma. From real, actual, unimagined, it really happened, trauma. Can trauma interplay with physical responses, autoimmune responses? Can mental health, anxiety, trauma, even mental illness perhaps, have an interplay there? Absolutely it can. Could it be causing her something like hives? Yes. Or could the hives have come first and be causing her stress and concern about, Annie apparently agrees with us here, about some sort of targeting that she might be experiencing. Either the anxiety is coming first and then the hives are coming, or the hives are coming from some other causal factor like, I don't know, laundry detergent, something she's using on her skin, something she's eating, and then the anxiety, and then the delusional thinking, or the obsessive-compulsive thinking comes into play. These are the two explanations that I would be looking at. Immediately rational inquiry. These are the likely explanations for this. Implants are discoverable via MRI, imaging technology. I am not a technologist. I can't tell you exactly what sort of imaging would be used, but the medical community is very knowledgeable. You should trust your doctor. If you don't like a particular doctor, go get a second opinion, get a third opinion. Doctors aren't working together to make you feel like you're delusional. It's just not a thing. God, the government can't even decide to give us a second stimulus package for COVID. I don't think that they're organized enough and that we have enough tax money to go around to be handing down to operations, I guess, involving making people get hives when they wake up and making them feel like they're being watched. And certainly, what reason would there be to watch this person? And I've run for local office. I've won an election. I've lost 2 elections. I'm not that interesting. That's not going to necessitate somebody targeting me being at the center of a Truman Show type of situation. And interestingly enough, this is often called the Truman Show delusion because the numbers of people suffering from it have gone up, A, after the Truman Show was released in 1999, and also, B, they've gone up with technology, because while people do tend to have a misunderstanding and or lack of understanding of technology and how it works, they do like to use the features they do understand, like message boards and Reddit and 4chan. The case numbers and percentages have gone up both since the Truman Show and over time with the population. The population grows, so does the amount of people who feel they're targeted. But the percentages have changed, not just the numbers. They've gone up, which again, to me, correlates to the rise in technology and the readily available nature of technology, and again, of these, God, I'm going to sound old, but chat rooms and message boards and IRC type chats and Discords and Reddits. I'm not prepared to assume causation or a causal link. Certainly a correlative link is obviously present. The possibility that there's a causal link there is quite high. Not prepared to name a certain percentage or anything like that. I haven't done the math on that, but I believe that there is definitely a correlative link, likely a causative link. So do some thinking and research about that on your own. Let me know what conclusions you come to. Going back to the story in Wired, as Occam's razor states, the simplest answer is usually accurate. Let's keep that in mind. In addition to Occam's razor, we should probably also keep in mind Hitchens' razor. Hitchens' razor states, what can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. If you're making a claim and you can't back it up, I don't have to entertain it. I don't have to debunk it. I don't have to prove that it's not true because you haven't been able to back up your own claim. I don't have to entertain it. Simply don't. Nobody does. And Occam's razor is a scientific and philosophical rule that entities should not be multiplied unnecessarily, which is interpreted as requiring the simplest of competing theories be preferred to the more complex of the theories, or that explanations of unknown phenomena be sought first in terms of known quantities. So it does really throw a wrench into conspiratorial thinking and magical thinking. To me, it appears that this targeted individual community and gang-stalking victim community may be engaged in and involved with. This seems conspiratorial to me. It does have all of the hallmarks of magical thinking, and unfortunately it shares a lot in common with some mental health issues that if an individual is experiencing those issues can be worsened by relating to a group of other individuals who are also having a similar delusion. So if you're already struggling and you're talking to other people with similar delusions, it's not going to help anybody's mental health. Back to the story. Liza is 56, a thin, wiry woman with elf-like ears and bright eyes. Sounds like a cool person. So 56, thin, wiry, elf-like ears, bright eyes, and she's an artist who grew up in the Rocky Mountains. She worked at Microsoft for 10 years and started her own web development company with her partner before the electronic attacks stalking and surveillance began. The electronic attacks, stalking, and surveillance she believes are happening began. This sounds like one thing that could be at play might be mental illness. I'm not here to diagnose. I wouldn't be comfortable doing that, and that wouldn't be ethical of me. But factors that could be at play might include schizophrenia, anxiety, OCD, bipolar 1 or 2, any combination therein, and or PTSD and or CPTSD, because she does have a decent understanding of technology. It sounds like, since she worked at Microsoft for 10 years, that these could be more prevalent factors than, for instance, some of the people who maybe just have a misunderstanding of how technology works and what it's able to do and what people might even have any interest in doing with it. With her, it seems like the mental health factors and personality factors could be more at play, perhaps. When she sought help, a hospital committed her. That's unfortunate, because that's going to make her not want to get help. Look, I'm going to back this up again. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm just a rambling rambler today. I'm a rambling, gambling lady here. Suspending my disbelief here and suspending logic. Even if you really were being targeted, you should go see somebody to talk about it. A professional psychologist, a professional coach, I'd say maybe both, and even a psychiatrist. Talk to that psychologist, talk to that coach about these things. They can't, even if we're suspending our disbelief completely and saying, even if they were approached by shadowy forces of unknown origin, I guess, they legally and ethically and morally could not and would not engage in anything that could harm you. Please, if you feel that you're going through something like this, you can trust mental health professionals. And if you don't like the first one you talk to, find another. And if you don't like the second one you talk to, find another. Find the right person for you to talk to. And heck, let's walk it through. Let's look at the logic. If you really are being targeted, and that's me suspending my disbelief. I don't believe that anyone is being targeted. I don't believe that that's possible. But if you are being targeted, and everybody already knows about it anyway, then what harm would there be in you going to somebody to talk about it and seek help? If everything you're saying is being listened to already, then what the hell's wrong with going to somebody and talking about it person to person, one-on-one, openly, right? Nothing. There is no possible harm that could come from that. Please understand that. Do I believe that any of those things are happening to anyone? No. Logic won't allow me to believe it. It sure would be an interesting, fanciful, sad, upsetting, over-the-top thing to believe if it were really happening, but it's likely not happening. Really, it's not. I'm sorry. So even if it were, what harm would there be? You already are feeling targeted. You're already feeling like you're being messed with. You're already feeling as if you are at the center of your own Truman show for some unknowable or opaque reason. Why not just talk to someone about it then? If everybody else knows about it anyway, and they can access you and harm you from afar no matter what you do, then what would be wrong with going in and talking to someone in person? So I'm trying to get through with some logic there if any of you listening feel that you might be a targeted individual. What harm could it do? That's what I want you to take away from this portion of the story. We're going to go through each point, and we're going to look at each point with critical thinking caps on. When she sought help, a hospital committed her to a 10-day hold in the mental ward, teaching her how to calm her racing heart without addressing the quote-unquote technology that Liza believed was causing it. I don't know what this technology was she feels is causing it. It's rather opaque, but apparently she believes it's some sort of outside influences or some implant or something. As far as I'm aware, there is no such technology. Do we do some weird experiments sometimes on willing subjects in the military? Yeah. Do we have the resources or the interest or the time to randomly target people? Or even target people for what we would consider really great reasons? No, we don't. It's really not how government works. Everything has to be done by consensus. We have to follow Robert's Rules of Order. We do more work at a local level than we do at a national level. There's really no reason that you should suspect a national conspiracy or a large conspiracy. And conversely, if you think something's happening up at the top, the judicial branch or the legislative branch or the executive branch is out to get you for some reason, it would be really difficult for them and time-consuming and really hard to keep secret for them to be involving local law enforcement officers. Now, I'm not saying there's not systemic racism and systemic oppression at any level of government or law enforcement or society in general, but certainly it would be very difficult to pass down an order like that from on high and not have anybody spill the beans or be an Edward Snowden. No, people aren't going to sit there and think that's ethical. If people were being asked to do that, this shit would be all over the news, let me tell you that. Edward Snowden even came out about NSA spying on people's phone calls. So what makes you think that this would be such a well-kept secret? The logic doesn't follow. But you have to be able to check yourself and say, are these thoughts and are these feelings lining up with shared reality? Are they lining up with logic? Are they lining up with Hitchens' razor and Occam's razor? This goes on to say, there was an encyclopedia of information, says Liza, a whole new vocabulary to help explain what she'd experienced. This catalog of information is being developed by these online communities of people who believe that they're targeted individuals and or being gang-stalked. So they're making up terms, as humans tend to do. Language grows and changes, especially in the internet age, in the Anthropocene, as some people are calling it. These are the new terms: gang-stalking, brain-computer interface, I guess, psychotronics. I felt really thankful, she says. I felt like I was opening up this crack into a whole new universe. Liza, who asked for her name to be changed, fearing retribution from the person or group behind her targeting, learned that she was one of thousands of people who identify themselves as quote-unquote targeted individuals. I would add that that's another term that's being invented, I guess out of necessity, by these people who feel that they're being targeted. A victim of human experiments, tracked and stalked and harassed by remote electronic weapons. Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. There were others who understood her plight, and together they could try to take action, fight back, and maybe find some relief. Well, hey, I'm not opposed to people taking action, fighting back, and trying to find some relief. I guess my concern would be, are we doing this in a healthy way? Are we doing this in a way that doesn't harm self or others? And are we doing this in a way that lines up with logic and reason and shared reality? Those would be my top concerns when it comes to some of these people fighting back and taking action. My concern would be if you feel that you're being targeted, when does that turn into you targeting, stalking, and harassing the people that you think are targeting, stalking, and harassing you? I will say that I've seen a few YouTube videos wherein these people who believe that they're targeted individuals actually go like on the offensive, and like this article started to allude to a moment ago, will confront and video and take audio of the people that they believe are stalking them or surveilling them. And oftentimes it's just somebody walking by wearing headphones, walking by talking on the phone, riding a bicycle, grocery shopping. My concern would be you feel that these people are watching you or surveilling you or stalking you. Okay, so maybe call the police. The explanation there is going to be, well, the police are in on it. Can't imagine that that would be even remotely possible. Even if you were, why? If it wasn't that wide-reaching for friggin' Martin Luther King, Black Panthers, and the KKK, how could it be that wide-reaching for one private citizen? It just doesn't make sense. While I do believe that taking back your power is important, we have got to be able to do it without harming others. Even if we believe for a second, suspend our disbelief and our rational inquiry and our logic, even if I disregarded that level of rational inquiry, how could this be happening to you? And how could this all be organized so perfectly against you? And even if these people were guilty that you were seeing and that you were running into and that you were thinking they're watching me or what have you, how would that be ethically appropriate? How? However and whenever is it appropriate to cause someone else harm because you believe they've done something to you? It's not. And again, that's what organizations like the police are here for. If you genuinely are in fear for your safety, please call the police, call the authorities. If nothing else, your report will be on record. So if it happens again, it'll be on record. It has to be. They can't just throw that out the window. It's got to be kept on record. Just you reporting it and the call being taken and or the paperwork that you perhaps choose to fill out being filed is going to make sure that it is on record for you. That's going to help you to back up your own story and to make sure that you are watching out for yourself. So let's say that this person really does show up at your house at some point and try to hurt you. It's not going to happen. But let's say it does. Suspend our disbelief. Well, now all of these reports that you filed come into play. If this goes to court later on, I filed a report, I talked to the police. It's really important. You genuinely fear for your safety. Please call the police. It's not going to make it worse, right? Let's say they are all in on it. It's not going to make it worse. It's already pretty bad, it sounds like, so call them, report it. It's always better to do that than to try to take matters into your own hands. And if you believe that you're being targeted and that you'd be treated unfairly if something were to happen, okay, maybe you feel that you'd be treated unfairly if you did call the police and this subject and this situation went to court later on. Well, how much worse would you be treated if you ended up hurting somebody? If you really are targeted, rather than just going to civil court because of all of the reports that you're making and this person sues you or something, how much worse would it be if you actually hurt that person? If you're being targeted, I think it would be a lot worse for you if you were to hurt somebody. Things would not go well for you. Much better to just document everything, write it down, keep a log, don't violate other people's rights, and report it. Report it to the authorities and do so regularly if you feel you're not safe. And then you're protected if something happens later on. And also, let's consider that these people who we maybe are believing are out to get us or hurting us or stalking us or whatever. What if you're wrong? That's somebody's spouse. They have people who love them. It's just not right, and it's not worth it to try to cause someone harm. So think about that. Use empathy, use logic and reason and rationality. It's what I'm trying to encourage you to do. I don't want to read this story and give anyone any ideas of harmful stuff to do. I want to look at it and go piece by piece and look at these things rationally and logically. It goes on, and it was late October when my Uber slowed to a stop in the woods after dark. We pulled to a stop at the top of a hill with a few low, cinder-block buildings in the distance. It was dead quiet. "Where are you going?" he asked. I tried my best to explain. I was there to attend the first ever Unity and Hope conference, a weekend gathering of targeted individuals. TIs were there to learn and organize and to be reminded that they were not alone. Well, again, that's nice that they don't feel alone, but not sure I'm loving the possibility of something harmful happening here. And also, you can understand where the Uber driver is coming from. I've driven for rideshare companies myself, and I would be very uncomfortable, and I'm not sure I would feel safe if somebody had me go off into the woods. And I'm not sure that I'd want to go there. I'd first heard about the TI community last summer, researching an article about RFID chips. Those rice grain-sized devices that can be implanted beneath the skin and used to unlock laptops and doors. Yes, some people have chosen to do that. But those would be picked up on an MRI or other imaging tests. People have been implanting microchips in pets as tracking devices, quote-unquote, for years. Even though the chips don't actually track locations, they serve as virtual ID tags that confirm the identity of the lost pet if it's listed in a database. Few people know as much about RFID chips as a biohacker named Amal Grafstra. On his website, I stumbled on a strange letter called "So You Think You've Been Implanted Against Your Will," which he posted in 2016. "Hello," the letter began. "You're likely here because you have a problem." Grafstra went on to list common symptoms. You hear voices or see lights. You believe you've been implanted with a chip against your will. Grafstra wanted to help. He is actually a big proponent of RFID technology. He's had a chip implanted in each hand since 2005. To Grafstra, getting the chip implants was a quote-unquote no-brainer, and he loves to experiment with what they are capable of. Among other things, his implants allow him to unlock his car and operate a smart gun. that only he can fire. Now that's interesting. That might really be an interesting technology. But not everyone shares Grafstra's perspective. Shortly after news of his implants was published in March of 2005, he got his first piece of hate mail. Since then, he's received hundreds more strange emails from death threats to questions about technology from worried, quote-unquote, TIs. In the beginning, when he first started hearing from people who believed they'd had chips implanted against their will, among other things about the car, the smart gun, which is interesting, his house key. Nowadays, you can just bring your smartphone or your Apple Watch or your Samsung Galaxy Watch or whatever with you, and that will be the chip or the key to unlocking it. But still, this is kind of cool, and I like the smart gun idea. I do think that could really do a lot to prevent gun violence. Shortly after news of his implants was published, again in March 2005, he got his first piece of hate mail. Since then, he's received hundreds more strange emails from death threats to questions from worried TIs. In the beginning, when he first started hearing from people who believed that they'd had chips implanted against their will, Grafstra wrote back to them, quote-unquote, I was like, okay, this person's misinformed. That's a normal, intelligent person who maybe has the wrong idea. And that's kind of how I feel. You just have the wrong idea. You're misinformed. You're not quite up on technology. It's okay. You'll be okay. I tried really hard to engage, he says. He suggested ways to verify if they really had an implant, like getting an x-ray at the doctor. Look, unfortunately though, guys, with conspiracy theories, conspiratorial thinking, it is easy to work from the conclusion that you've already made and work back from there. And to say, oh, well, they don't want me to see the MRI or X-ray images, and they're pretending, and da-da-da, or it's so small, nobody can see it, even though that's easily, the claims are easily debunked. So it's magical thinking, fallacious reasoning, it's pseudoscientific reasoning, and you're working backward from an assumed conclusion, rather than looking at the data as it comes in and discarding the things that aren't possible. These people are going to want to believe what they want to believe, no matter what you say, essentially. I believe that everybody is susceptible to logic, right? So you can still work on people, you can still respectfully engage. Hopefully, those people will, at some point, listen to you. And if they don't, and if they just will not listen to reason, that's fine. It's fine just not to talk about it. It's fine to disengage if you have to. But hopefully you're able to have a productive dialogue. And it sounds like this guy's had trouble having that with the people who are writing to him about their concerns with being quote-unquote targeted individuals. And that's too bad. He suggested all of these ways to get testing, and they just poo-pooed it and engaged in that fallacious reasoning. He pointed out logical fallacies in their beliefs, including the technical impossibility of chip implants capable of tracking an individual. A GPS microchip would have the same energy demands and battery problems as a smartphone. While researchers are experimenting with implants that might help treat neurodegenerative diseases or link prosthetics to neural pathways in the brain, even the most advanced technology can't make someone hear voices or experience a different reality. But his logical appeals rarely mattered. People on the other end had already made up their minds. Like I said, they're working backward from already drawn conclusions. In the weeks leading up to the Hope and Unity conference, says the writer, I'd spoken to a few TIs over the phone myself, and I encountered the same certainty and desperation as Grafstra. But I'd never met a TI in person, and walking up to the buildings that first night, I was nervous. I had no idea what to expect. I said hello to a few people gathered outside and then looked for the conference's organizer in the cafeteria. It was the main meeting area, and it was warm and cheerful inside. Classic rock played from the sound system, and attendees, mostly in their 40s and 50s, mostly white, drank tea and ate brownies under fluorescent lights. Unfortunately, the quote-unquote spiritual and white spiritual and quote-unquote wellness communities are just absolutely rife with this illogical thinking and with conspiracies, and I do believe that race plays a role in this, and our perception and perpetuation of racial stereotypes and ingrained bias, systemic biases. I do think that these things give white people almost an inflated sense of self-importance, And I believe that when they have just a basic, maybe perhaps not deep grasp of these, what they would see as nebulous Eastern spiritual concepts, and they only have their own life experience to base all of what they're learning about them on, that can lead, especially in somebody who's not maybe as intelligent or isn't practicing the intelligence that they do have, that can lead them to fallacious assumptions and fallacious reasoning and fallacious and magical thinking and systems of belief. And that is really problematic. And I think that that sort of thinking should be guarded against. And I think in this particular case, and certainly it's not all white people that feel that they're targeted individuals, but white people are a larger percentage of the population, but it still seems unusually, the TI community seems unusually saturated with white people. And I believe that that is unfortunate. These systemic biases and systems of oppression that benefit white people also hurt them. I think this is a really good illustration of how. They were, for the most part, the author goes on to say, friendly and talkative. A woman grew suspicious of my notebook. What's a better cover story than being a writer, she said, while another thanked me deeply for listening to her story. It wasn't often that she got to tell it without judgment or dismissal. Before I settled in for that night's program, a screening of a documentary called Monarch, the New Phoenix program, I headed to the dorms. The venue was a nature education center, a summer camp for kids, but that evening the long hallways, orange carpet, and outdated furniture seemed somehow eerie. I set my bags down in an empty room and went back to the cafeteria where the lights would soon dim for the showing. Over grainy archival footage, a monotone narrator explained the shadowy history of CIA programs like the original Phoenix, an assassination and torture initiative that killed as many as 40,000 suspected Viet Cong supporters during the Vietnam War. Next, the documentary reviewed the infamous MKUltra program, carried out by CIA operatives and psychologists during the Cold War. A true history that sounds like a horror film. Heavy doses of LSD, sleep deprivation, intensive electroshock therapy, alleged experiments on children, psychological torture. MKUltra and the Phoenix Project both sounded like the stuff of conspiracy theories, but much of what's alleged has since been documented and confirmed. And now, folks, that's true, and a lot of these people who were part of these, if not all of them, I should really look at that data to be certain, did sign up for it. They just weren't pulling people off the street and messing up their entire lives for no reason. So these were actual studies that were done. Studies have to include actual release for participation by the people in the studies, by the subjects, okay? That's how studies work, that's how science works. The author goes on to say, the movie doesn't stop with history, though. It alleges that the secret government programs never ended. Okay, now the government programs were secret to the rest of the population. They weren't secret to the people involved in the studies. Let's just clear that up right off the bat. They are still, says the author, attacking U.S. citizens. This is what the documentary says. They're still attacking U.S. citizens through covert, powerful electronic weapons today, and the victims are known as targeted individuals, basically. The droning narrative and disturbing imagery made me increasingly unnerved, and I left before the film ended. Back in my dorm room, I stayed awake late, listening to sirens and tires screeching in the distance. In the morning, there were around 50 attendees gathered in the presentation room. The day began with a talk by Matthew Aaron, a PhD in neurobiology who was working on an article on bioluminescent fish for Nature magazine when his targeting began. Today, Aaron works as a science consultant in Washington, D.C., and he began his talk with a disclaimer. His presentation was aimed at the general public, not the expert audience in front of him. By being targeted, quote-unquote, you know more than a non-expert could ever hope to know, he said. He thanked the non-TIs who had shown up at the conference. That shows the degree of willingness to take this issue on and consider it, and that's a big step, Aaron said. It's a very lonely crime that we're going through, quote-unquote. Through the next hour, he detailed evidence of his own targeting and the potential technologies used against him, from low-intensity microwaves. No. That's not scientifically possible, you guys. A scientist should know this. From the neighbor next door to military electronic beams. His targeting began in his apartment and eventually became so bad that he ripped off sections of the drywall spots he believed that emitted hot electric microwave energy. This sounds like a delusion. This doesn't sound like he's actually in his fact-based, logical mind. That's got to be a scary state of mind to be in. I feel for this guy. Later, after he'd fled Vancouver, Canada, I guess that's where he was living, he examined the pieces under a blacklight around the spots he'd removed of the drywall, I guess, and he found rings of fluorescent material. Okay, guys, this is a clear-cut case of confirmation bias. That's the simplest explanation here. He was working on a piece for the journal Nature on bioluminescent fish. His confirmation bias is playing up with stress, possible anxiety, and this is where his mind goes. He should know better as a scientist, but if he is struggling with a mental illness, of course his mental illness is going to prevent him from thinking about it logically and rationally, which is really, really unfortunate and very sad. The next 2 days were packed with similar dissections of targeting technology, testimonials, and action plans. A woman showed the unlikely links that popped up when she began typing code names for the CIA and MK Ultra into a local property deed website. David Voits, a former naval officer, spoke about walking across the U.S. to raise awareness of non-consensual human experimentation. Wow, walking across the U.S. His talk moved the TIs to line up after and shake his hand in gratitude. During breaks and meals, TIs who had never met before discovered shared symptoms and compared notes and theories from who was behind our targeting, government agencies, criminal organizations, big tech companies, people in their own lives, in parentheses, to ways to detect or shield themselves against the technology. They were full of information and desperate to learn more. They were engineers and scientists and artists, former government and military employees, and some, like Liza, had driven more than 2,000 miles to attend. It wasn't the first time Liza had traveled far to seek a solution to the targeting of individuals. In 2014, she drove from the Midwest to New York City, sleeping in her car for 2 weeks while she met with nonprofits she hoped to enlist in combating the problem. The Center for Constitutional Rights, Psychologists for Social Responsibility, and Physicians for Human Rights. She hoped that someone would help put a stop to the injustices she suffered. Nobody would take my story, she says. Nobody would touch it with a 10-foot pole. But at the conference, she and the other TIs were among people who understood them. People who spoke the same language. Outside the presentation room, beneath the sun and the blue sky, if I could momentarily forget that we were talking about mind control, it almost felt like I was at an adult summer camp. And at the end of the 3rd day, the TIs gathered on a hill for a group photo. They called out, "We are the targeted individuals," and I counted 3 while the camera snapped. Getting a decent photo took some jostling. When the photography directed more enthusiasm, a woman responded half in jest, "We can't. We're TIs." To the outside world, there are implausible, ridiculous, or even evidence of mental illness, in large part because technology and paranoia have a long, interconnected history. In 1810, a man named James Tilly Matthews, who was confined in London's infamous Bedlam Asylum, drew a detailed illustration of a machine he called the heirloom. He believed that with it a gang of invisible assailants was tormenting him with gases and magnetic rays. Similar theories popped up with the advent of telegraph and cell phones. More than 200 years later, the narrative sounds startlingly familiar. The difference? Today, prototypes of directed energy weapons actually do exist, though none are in use. The UN banned blinding laser weapons in 1998, and sonic weapons have been around for decades. Technology is neutral, it's how we use it that matters, but are there actual voice-to-skull machines? That sounds like a Rube Goldberg machine. It sounds like it should be in a comic. And I'm not saying that to dismiss the people who feel that these things are happening to them. I'm saying it to hopefully bring some logic into the conversation and get people's minds going and going, oh, you know what? It's true. That maybe doesn't make 100% sense. According to David Laporte, a psychology professor at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, technology is the perfect culprit for delusional beliefs. Exactly. It's a hook you can hang your beliefs on. It's like a straw man. It's ever evolving, and for many people, it's slightly beyond understanding. The earliest Google searches for the term targeted individual appeared in 2004, around the time Grafstra got his first RFID chip implants. And searches for the term spiked in 2013 and 14 when Edward Snowden exposed the NSA surveillance of ordinary Americans. Again, this isn't just targeting individuals, this is a blanket surveillance program. Doesn't care about me, it doesn't care about you. Likely, it's not going to retain anything that it even hears from any of our phone calls, or we're not that important, I'm sorry to say. We're just not. Today, technology is increasingly folded into our everyday lives. Some 8.4 billion connected things will be used globally this year, most of which are vulnerable to hacking and surveillance. Early this year, a German regulatory agency labeled a blonde talking doll named My Friend Kayla an illegal espionage apparatus, recommending its destruction. The FDA recently approved the first pill that can track whether a patient has taken it. These Big Brother-esque developments are worrying even if you are not a suspicious or paranoid person. For the TIs, these devices are their worst fears realized. The technology doesn't just spy on them or track them, it attacks them. Finding others who share your beliefs creates a quote-unquote perfect storm, says Laporte, a way for the beliefs to spiral. Without the internet, Laporte believes this would have never happened, or at least it wouldn't have happened on the same scale, nor spread as quickly, nor become so deeply rooted. The New York Times estimated that there are more than 10,000 self-identified TIs. I don't know if that's in the US or throughout the world. It seems like they're perhaps talking about people in the US, though it doesn't specify. Okay. It is also what lets them meet each other. In weekly newsletters and in-person support groups, they find a community of people who listen and the knowledge that they're not alone. One morning at the conference, I overhear a TI tell another that she was planning to quote-unquote get her perpetrators. What do you mean? The other woman asks. I mean, I'm going to get them. Maybe not all of them, but as many as I can get. Did you see that guy wandering around last night? You remember what happened with Vegas? What if he'd come in here with a gun? She's talking about the man with the fedora who had stood at a distance from the other TIs, muttering to himself, pacing and acting strangely last night. Folks, this is mental illness. This is likely paranoid schizophrenia. This is not a guy who's out to get anyone, although he turned out to have been a fellow TI. Of course he did. Surprisingly friendly when he wasn't muttering warnings. But it is days after a gunman shot 58 strangers at a concert in Las Vegas, and the thought of it must have been hanging over everyone's minds. I feel unsettled too. When I curl up in bed that night, I think about all the unlocked doors at the conference and the unpredictability of violence. I mean, that's a valid concern when you're around people who may be experiencing paranoia. And for days after the conference, I worry. Was the woman I'd overheard planning something serious, and was I responsible for doing something to stop her? I probably would report it, but that's because I'm a mandated reporter. Our job, no matter what our status, to report that. Our own rights to swing our fist, and when our fist connects with somebody else's nose. It's really important to keep that in mind. According to Laporte, there are rare but disturbing instances of paranoia that lead to violence. Dylan Roof comes to mind. In 2016, a man in Colorado who shot numerous police officers identified as a TI, but the statistical link between mental illness and violence is far lower than most people believe. I have not seen evidence that the TIs commit violence, Laporte told me. However, that doesn't mean that they're not harming themselves and others. I was too nervous to confront the woman from the bathroom, unsure about how she would react, but before I left the conference, she approached me and handed me a binder that contained her full story. When I read it, I felt both sad and reassured. In her handwritten pages, there were many pleas for help and no plans to harm. That is so sad. Sometimes 'tis asked of me if I was worried about becoming a targeted person myself. I told them no, but I was worried about what might happen to the TIs, what they might do or be driven to do. Well, I would worry about self-harm. That is what my concern would be. Most of all, I worried that I would disappoint them, that I couldn't tell their story the way they wanted it to be told. Exactly what my concern is right now. Liza and the other TIs told me again and again that the worst part of being a TI is not having people believe you. Being made to look crazy was part of the targeting. While the TIs are still searching for evidence of black ops and covert crimes, their stories are just that, stories. You could believe them or not. Most people don't. Well, look, it's logic. It's not a matter of choosing not to believe. I believe that these people believe this on some level, but I can't both be a logical and rational person and believe that their stories are true in shared reality. It's just not possible. Can't resolve that. That's a terrible thing, Liza said. You don't really understand how dear and vital the connection to other people is until it's taken away. In the months I'd spent talking to the TIs, I witnessed how lonely it was to experience something that so few can see or acknowledge. How terrible it must be to be dismissed as crazy and delusional, no matter how hard you tried to make people understand. Months after the conference, I got an unexpected email from another TI. She was an artist who wore a hat trimmed and lined with copper to black out the radio waves. She was lovely and memorable. I had comforted her briefly at the conference when she had a fit of unhappiness. Her email was brief. She offered to talk about her experience and attached what she said was evidence of her targeting and photos of her paintings. You are very nice, she wrote, and that is rare for us to experience. That's very sweet. The author goes on to say, I broke into tears when I read it, imagining a life in which such a small kindness would be so hard to find. Liza had told me stories of her life before the targeting began. The 10 summers she spent working at hatcheries in Alaska, painting watercolors, and working at her friend's general store, zooming around in a little Honda that was like the closest thing to flying, quote-unquote. She traveled overseas, seeing Israel, Turkey, Egypt. She spent years painting or making sculptures, and later falling in love with Microsoft, the campus with all its trees and the freedom to learn everywhere. She always loved learning and exploring new worlds, but the TI universe is different. It's not about who we are, but technology, she says. It changes who we are, and it changes our lives. Once she loved technology, shaping and molding it, playing with data in the back end of a website. When the targeting first began, she even considered the ways the technology could do good. What if, for instance, the chip inside your head could teach you to speak a new language? That's not possible. But she quickly learned that it wasn't there to teach her, it was there to hurt her. It was permanent, and it would change her forever. These are her words. This is not in any way proven or factually accurate. This is what she feels is her honest experience, and that's the end of the article. So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a explanation of a story of somebody who was a TI. It's already out there and been published, and somebody has given their permission, even though their name was changed, for their story to be told. Let's look at what psychologists say about this. There is an article in the New York Times about this from 2016, written by Mike McFate. Timothy Trespass at his home in Brooklyn. It reads under a picture here of a gentleman who looks like he's a bit distressed. Where he now lives, last month. I don't really have any friends anymore, says Timothy. I've become so extremely isolated. And that's the thing, the isolation. Nobody believed him, says Mr. McFate. His family told him to get help, but Timothy Trespass, an out-of-work recording engineer in his early 40s, was sure he was being stalked, and not just by one person, but by dozens of them. He would see the quote-unquote operatives, he said, disguised as ordinary people lurking around his Midtown Manhattan neighborhood. Sometimes they bumped into him and whispered nonsense into his ear, he said. Now you see how it works, they would say. To me, that sounds like perhaps this gentleman who was experiencing the factors of stress, paranoia, potential mental illness, or personality factors. Stress is a big factor on our perception and how we act, whether it be internal stressors, external stressors, or a combination of both. Usually it's a combination of both. Whether we're going through a particularly stressful time overall in our lives, or whether these factors just arise irrespective or possibly partially irrespective of a potentially stressful time we're experiencing. I would say it's all of that coupled with seeing people outside doing normal things. And your mind is telling you, because of these stressors, that these people are doing things that are illegal, or they're stalking you or following you, when in reality, what is the most likely explanation? Well, they're just people outside who are going about their own private business, doing things they need to do, shopping, walking around. That's the most likely explanation. Simplest explanation is usually the truth. And as far as him thinking that they're saying, now you see how it works to him, perhaps he's picking up bits and pieces of conversation and just his brain is going through that confirmation bias process and picking up on things that misidentifies or that it identifies as related to him, when in fact, perhaps somebody was saying that to someone on the phone, talking to somebody next to them while they were walking, or maybe they didn't say that at all, and his brain is just hearing that because that's what he expects to hear, and that plays into his narrative. Have you ever played the game Telephone? Proof positive right there that that's how the human brain works. It's your advanced brain and your intelligence and the wiring of your brain and that survival part of your brain playing tricks on you. And it's just important to be able to identify that. They'll help you identify things that could be playing into you feeling out of control, and identify things that perhaps feel true but aren't. So let's move on a little bit. Mr. Trespass is part of a group who get together and talk about being quote-unquote targeted individuals. And as it says, the group is organized around the conviction that its members are victims of a sprawling conspiracy to, I guess, harass thousands of everyday Americans with ostensibly what they feel are mind control weapons and armies of so-called gang-stalkers. If there were armies of gang-stalkers, wouldn't you think that there would have been a whistleblower or two? No? Logically speaking, you would think there would be. And some credible whistleblowers that could really come out with some factual information. If this program exists and they're part of it, you would think they could do that. And you would think that they would be compelled to do that. It's a reasonable assumption. Based on people like Edward Snowden, based on past happenings, pretty reasonable there, I think. The goal, as one gang-stalking website put it, of these programs or groups of people that they believe are out to get them, is to quote-unquote destroy every aspect of a targeted individual's life. To what end? I can't imagine. How would they be collecting data? Any data they would be collecting from this so-called program would be inadmissible into any sort of a scientific study. It doesn't make any sense to me. Who would be doing this just to mess with people? Because they're not collecting any kind of meaningful data that they can use for a number of reasons. Going on here to some of the finer points of this article, a growing tribe of troubled minds. Well, mental health professionals are saying that there's a narrative that's taking hold among a group of people experiencing psychotic symptoms. I would tend to agree with that. That have troubled the human mind since time immemorial. Absolutely true. Except now victims are connecting on the internet, organizing, and defying medical explanations for what's happening to them. And again, I do think that that sort of misunderstanding of technology comes into play. The community, says the writer, conservatively estimates that the number of people exceeds 10,000, at least 10,000 members, as we heard about in that Wired article, and that it's proliferated since 9/11. Well, what is that? That's a stressful event right there. That's trauma, and that did lead to a lot of fallacious conspiracies and conspiracy theories. So right there, that is a precipitating event. Cradled, they say, by the internet and fed by genuine concerns over government surveillance. Of course. But I think the big concern we should have is how is our data being managed? From our phones, from our laptops. I think that's a valid concern, but to take it as far as to say that you're a targeted individual, I don't feel that there's any kind of factual support for that. I'd like to be able to completely accept that explanation because it means so much to so many people, but I can't because it's just not factually accurate. I can accept that to some extent and on some level, people believe this. I cannot accept that it is true, unfortunately, in shared reality. And I think that the fact that it's not, or likely not, but really it's not, should be of comfort. But it does seem to give these people, it almost seems to challenge their identity when you say that. Rather than giving them comfort, it almost seems to challenge this thing that they've made an integral part of their identity. And to me, I would challenge anything that I or anybody else makes an integral part of our identity. I would really challenge that. Why are you telling yourself this story about who you are? What are you getting from it? What negative or positive factors are influencing you there? What feedback, negative or positive, are you getting from that? Are you telling yourself a story about why you're a loner? Are you telling yourself a story about why you maybe don't have as many friends as you once had? About why you haven't been able to land that job you wanted? About why you're experiencing thoughts or feelings that seem paranoid or delusional or upsetting? And if you're telling yourself a story, how much does it connect or how little does it connect with shared reality? Gotta look at that. A few specialists have looked into that, and it does tend to be the consensus within the mental health community that it's simply a group of unwell individuals who are experiencing stress and mental health issues have banded together. And while that sounds like a good thing, in this case it seems to me that while there may be some positive benefits coming out of this banding together of disparate individuals who believe that they're targeted individuals, I believe that they're getting more of a negative feedback and more of a negative bolstering of their beliefs than they are any kind of a positive result of banding together. And that's really too bad. And with some, certainly not suggesting that this is explanation of the issue with all of those who believe that they're targeted individuals, but with some, I do believe that there's some degree of egotism, if not actual out-and-out narcissism involved in believing that you're that important. I don't believe that anybody is, no matter what your role in society is. Nobody's that important. And that can be a scary thought. But really, don't you have to look at your own importance in terms of how you feel about what you do and what you've done and how you've influenced the world? Shouldn't you be looking at your imprint on the world in terms of, have I left it better than I've found it? And have I done something meaningful and purposeful and positive and fact-based that everyone in shared reality, hopefully, or many or most people within the construct of shared reality and the paradigm of shared reality can agree has had a positive effect on the world? And if nothing else, do I believe that I've had a genuinely positive effect on the world? And I'm not talking about TIs banding together or conspiracy theorists telling everyone the truth is out there. I'm talking about helping somebody. Maybe a friend is suicidal or something and you've helped them out. Maybe you try to help older people across the street or help them with their groceries. Substantive things like this. Whether they be small or large actions, what are your habitual give-backs to the world? Well, how are you paying things forward? And I think that's what we need to look at. And I think if you're feeling out of control or you're feeling like you have a limited amount of control in your life, well, that's true. That's true for all of us, and that's okay. How are you showing up, and how are you giving back in a positive way? So outside of this paradigm of, I think I'm a targeted individual, or I think I'm being gang-stalked, what are you doing to show up in the world? I know it's scary to have to do that. And it's scary to not be able to have that excuse of, I can't get that job, I can't do that thing I want to do, I can't pursue contentment in my life, I can't help other people in a positive, meaningful way because I'm targeted. Now, outside of that framework, what are you doing to show up in the world? I can almost guarantee you that if you continually work at that, and you continually, every single day, find a way to give back and do something beautiful and something good, your symptoms will slowly start to abate. And if this is a mental illness issue, and they don't, seek help. If everybody already is in on it and knows that you're being targeted, and all of this stuff can be done remotely, and you have no control, then there's no excuse not to talk to a professional about it, is there? Right? That's your reason for not talking to a professional, but it should also be a more potent reason to talk to a professional, shouldn't it? Logic, fact, reason. I hope that that's helped anybody who feels that they might be struggling with this. And I do want to warn against, as this New York Times article also warns against, being part of an echo chamber. No matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about targeted individuals, gang-stalking, politics, quote-unquote spirituality, or what I would probably call white spirituality and bypassing spirituality, sort of toxic, culty stuff, MLMs, all of that. Don't get into an echo chamber. But of course, echo chambers are not just for those toxic areas of life. Echo chambers could be anything from your political beliefs to your religious beliefs. Don't get into an echo chamber. Talk to other people who believe things differently than you do. Don't isolate yourself. Don't only speak and interact with and amplify the voices of people who agree with you. That is egotistical. And it is a weird inverse kind of egotism, but it is egotism nonetheless. Don't do that. It's tempting to do that. It's tempting to allow your brain and your emotions and your feelings to lead you around by the nose. And it's tempting to use all of that as an excuse as to why you can't do or didn't do, why you can't engage or didn't engage, didn't do that thing you wanted to do, didn't take the job you wanted, didn't start a relationship that you wanted to have, didn't say sorry to somebody who you hurt. But it's bullshit. I'm sorry, it's bullshit. That's all confirmation bias, and that is an inverse sort of egotism that is working against you and eating away at who you are as a person. Don't let it. And mental illness does that too. If it rises to the level of a mental illness and or a personality issue or disorder, it is incumbent upon you to talk to a professional. Should it be? No. Would it be nice if professionals would just show up at our door and check on us? Yes, of course it would be. That's not how things work. Be comforted by this. All you have to do is take that first step out the door to talk to a professional. That's all you have to do. I have such empathy and compassion for people who believe these things. I don't necessarily have empathy and compassion for the beliefs themselves, but the people who believe them, I have extreme empathy and compassion for them. And I'd like to invite you to have empathy and compassion for other people outside of yourself, whether you're concerned that that person at the grocery store is stalking you. Think about what their life might be like. Think about what factors might be at play in their life. Have some empathy and compassion. Having empathy and compassion for that person might actually get you questioning these beliefs. Don't put yourself into a cult of belief. Don't do that. That's an echo chamber. Echo chambers don't help anybody. Don't do it. I want to leave you with some advice from Dr. Lorraine Sheridan, who is co-author of the New York Times Agrees. I think this is the only study of gang-stalking that's ever yet been done. And I should revisit that and make sure that that's an accurate statement. I will do that, and if I find that there have been studies done more recently, I will try to include those in my description of this episode. For now, I'm pretty sure that this is the only study that's so far been done. Dr. Lorraine Sheridan is a co-author. The community poses a danger that sets it apart from other groups, promoting troubling ideas such as anorexia or suicide. And on those topics, now we can add QAnon to that. On those topics, the internet abounds with medical information and treatment options. But for gang stalking, there's really no widely accepted treatment option because this is not accepted as an actual real thing that's happening. An internet search for gang stalking, however, turns up page after page of results that regard it as fact because these are people who believe it, discussing it, and these are the only things available to come up in a Google search of the subject. It confirms your own echo chamber when you search it. She says what's scary for her is that there are no counter sites that try and convince targeted individuals that they're delusional. Now, I wouldn't say I'm going to try to convince someone they're delusional. That's a little bit of a strong statement. But I see what Dr. Sheridan is saying. I would like to not convince someone they're delusional, but just get them questioning via rational inquiry and via the scientific method, their beliefs in that light. That is the accepted way to find truth. That's the only way that our brains can find truth. The only way the universe can find truth. The universal law. She's concerned that when people do these internet searches, they end up in a closed ideology echo chamber. I would agree with that. I would echo that concern very much. In instructional tracts online, veterans of the movement explain the ropes to rookies. Do not engage with the voices in your head, say these veteran targeted individuals. If your relatives tell you you're imagining things, they could be in on it. Well, gosh, not engaging with the voices in your head, I understand to an extent, but I would actually say you don't have to talk back and forth with them, but you could write down the thoughts and feelings and then look at it rationally and do some logical inquiry. I can label that thought as anxiety. I can label that thought as depression. I can label that thought as concern. What do I have to be concerned about? Is there something I'm anxious about? Is there something I might be depressed about? And you don't have to even answer those questions, but as long as you ask them, that's a good idea. I would also disagree with the person who says that if your relatives tell you you're imagining things, they could be in on it. No, your relatives are probably well-meaning and are concerned about you. But I wouldn't go around telling people they're imagining things so much as, why don't we look at this together? Let's break it down. Let's talk. It's really important to engage with people who maybe don't believe that this is accurate. Maybe you can both learn something from it. You can both learn something from the discussion. Another suggestion that's given to these people in some of these forums is do not visit a psychiatrist. Well, why? Again, we already debunked that one on this show. If everybody's already in on it and everybody can hurt you even from afar without your input, without your consent, then why the hell wouldn't you go talk to somebody about it? At least you'll feel better that you talked. Dr. Sheridan says the tribe cuts across all classes and professions and includes lawyers, soldiers, artists, and engineers. Mental illness doesn't discriminate, and we need to destigmatize that. And I think that the stigmatization of mental illness really plays into this a lot. That's part of the good I'm trying to do in the world, is just put a small dent in that. And with enough dents, that stigma will die by death by 1,000 cuts from 1,000 different sources. And maybe you can join me in helping destigmatize that. We can each put our own little cut in that stigma until it just blows up, disappears, goes away, and we can dismantle it together. I think that'd be pretty good, don't you? Whether you believe that you're mentally ill or whether you believe that you're a targeted individual, I think we can all agree that you probably feel stigmatized. In Facebook forums, says Dr. Sheridan, and call-in support groups, they commiserate over the skepticism of their loved ones and share stories of black vans that circle the block or coworkers conscripted into their campaign. Well, here's what I would say to that. If you have the idea of a black van in your head, even if you don't think you're a TI, go out there right now, walk around the block a few times, think about that black van. It's like I'm telling you, don't think about a pink elephant. You're going to think about the pink elephant. So walk around that block with that idea of a black van in your head, and I guarantee you, whoever you are, wherever you're at right now, you're going to see black vans. Because they're there to get you? No. But because you're noticing them more, because the idea is already in your head? Bingo. That is it. That's confirmation bias. Do the experiment yourself. See if I'm not correct about that. And of course, the color black and the type of vehicle known as a van are very common. You're going to see a few of them. Now, if I said, go out there and look for a pink Hyundai with green stripes, probably not going to see any because that's uncommon. A black van? It's pretty common. Your confirmation bias is going to play right into that. Also, it is believed that this is a mishmash of conspiracy theories. I am very concerned about QAnon playing into this personally. I do believe that that is going to be a real issue. I believe that some of the conspiracy theories that are popular are playing into the TI phenomenon. Of course, I do end this on the somewhat hopeful note that most people who do experience psychosis, paranoia, they don't act violently, but that doesn't mean they're not doing damage to themselves. That's a really lonely and upsetting way to live. That is damaging. And you matter, and you shouldn't have to live that way. You should be able to live, and you can live a happy life and a productive life. You can, I promise you that. But your first step has got to be to talk to a psychologist about this, or a licensed clinician. I'm sorry, I know that's so scary. There are probably so many reasons you can think of right now, and your confirmation bias is going to just jump on every single one of them for why you shouldn't go and talk to a professional. That's the last thing that's going to help you right now. So please go talk to a professional. Thank you for listening, and I just want to let you know if you have any stories you'd like to share, either confidentially or as we continue to discuss this topic with my broader audience, I will do my utmost to respectfully share them. If you have something you want to tell me privately, as long as you're not referencing harming yourself or others, of course, or planning to commit a crime, which I am legally obligated to report, as long as that's not involved with your story, I will keep it confidential and I won't mention it. I don't know you, but I do know that there are people who care about you, and I just want you to not shut them out. You don't have to agree on everything with everyone in your life. And yeah, this is a big thing not to agree on, but look, they love you. They're probably showing it in the best way they can, and I wonder if you're showing them that you love them, and if your life experience isn't leading you to shut off and to sort of not look at what they might be going through. So they might need you as much, if not more, at points as you need them. So something to think about. Don't shut people out. Talk to a professional. Thank you for listening. Please share your stories at Dominique Does Life on Twitter, on Facebook. You can message me privately at Dominique Does Life. And I wish you well, and thank you for tuning in. And if you're not somebody who considers themselves to be a targeted individual, but you found this to be interesting, like, share, subscribe, and follow me. We'll be back on Sunday with some more true crime. We're going to be doing First Question and Dominique Does Life. And I believe that Matt is going to be joining us again on Sunday. Probably we're going to record that show, edit it down, and then put it out on Monday or Tuesday. But follow us on Spreaker, the app, or Spreaker.com at Dominique Does Life and First Question. And follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Dominique Does Life and at First Question, so that you know when we do release an episode. And do leave us a review on iTunes, on Facebook. Let us know what you think. Thanks for listening, and take care.